So we have some good audience questions. Are you ready to get into those?
Yes.
All right, let's do it. Okay. So how do you know if you're avoiding drama or avoiding conflict, which can be silencing of yourself? So I think, how do you know if you're avoiding drama, avoiding the conflict, or if you're just staying out of it, it sounds like.
Does it involve you? Because some drama that's happening, it really doesn't have anything to do with us. It could be our parents and their relationship. It could be our siblings or our parents with their siblings. So what is being brought to you? Mm-hmm. Is this something that you want to be stopped? Or is there a statement that needs to be made? Sometimes with avoidance, we're actually not avoiding because we've made a statement of, hey, I don't want to participate in this, or this is the thing I think about this thing, or please do not X, Y, and Z. So there has been some statement made about your position. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily avoidance. But if you're like, oh my gosh, all this chaos is unfolding and I'll just be quiet, then that might be a little bit of avoidance. So I would say, what is your intention? What have you done? Have you set any boundaries? Have you talked about this with one or more people involved? And if you've done those things and you're just like, you know what, from now on, I won't get in it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's not avoidance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to kind of do that check to see what your role is in the problem. All right, I like this question. You talk a lot about what we can do to accept others without trying to make them change, but what responsibility does the other person have to engage with us in ways that we feel comfortable with?
It is hard to determine another person's responsibility level. We can have that desire, but we can't necessarily make them do anything. Now, if they want to be in relationship with us, we can have the expectation that they respect certain things about our space, about our bodies, about the way that they communicate with us, but we can't make them do anything differently. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But hopefully, with healthy folks, I don't think it's always problematic to have those conversations. I think when you're getting a lot of pushback sometimes, maybe we don't even recognize that people have their own trauma. They have some mental health issues that haven't been addressed. Yeah. And so we're trying to go to people who have all of these challenges where it's like, yeah, what you're saying, it isn't going to be that helpful because they have a deeper issue that is beyond you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this fits in really well with our conversation about acceptance, right? Mm-hmm. That people do have a responsibility, but you're saying sometimes they can't fulfill that responsibility, right? And so we have to say, okay, with the way this person is behaving, how do I want to interact with them now if they cannot fulfill that responsibility? Mm-hmm. It's a hard position to be in, for sure.
It is.
Next question. What do you recommend for people who are easily triggered by family, in parentheses, parents, they see often?
What do you recommend? I would suggest noting what makes you feel triggered. That's the first thing. And those might be the things you need to talk about with your parents. Sometimes we want to be in relationships, but we don't want to do any work on the relationship because we may feel like this other person, they won't hear us, they see us as their child, they won't do these things, and we don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know what episode of Oprah your mom watched today, but she might be in a changing spirit today. You don't know until you have that conversation. And then I think about that you see often. Why? Mm-hmm. Why do you see people often that you feel constantly triggered by?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This is a good expansion on something that we just kind of talked about. How can I manage anger and guilt when dealing with parents with mental health issues?
I would say educate yourself on your diagnosis. Mm-hmm. The more information that you have about a personality issue or anxiety or depression. It won't excuse their behavior, but it will help you to understand some of the things that they're going through. I remember a woman whose mother was schizophrenic, and the level of compassion she had for her mother was just so amazing. You know, she was like 19 and she lived on her own and she helped care for her mother. She's like, you know, my mom just can't do it. It was so much acceptance around, you know, my older brother had to step in and raise me. Like, my mom just doesn't have the skill. It's not even a requirement that I can have for her, because what she's dealing with is beyond parenting. She is seeing things that are not present. She is hearing things. You know, so when you understand what a person is going through, you can take yourself out of the equation. This isn't about me. This is a bigger thing than me. And how can I be compassionate? How can I, you know, maybe help them in some cases? How can I explore this with them? I think the bigger challenge is when you assume your parent has a mental health issue and they don't have a diagnosis.
Or they deny it.
Or they deny it, or they won't go to treatment. You know, I've heard people say, like, my mom went to the doctor once and they told her she was bipolar and she said that's not true. It's like, okay. They may have been onto something. A lot of what you're saying sounds like maybe that is the case. But, you know, you do have people who will be like, nope, that's not true. And they don't want to take any medication, or they don't want to see a therapist, or, you know, they're really rejecting of what that diagnosis is, which makes it hard for a person to empathize because you're not trying to get any help.
Yeah, it's reminding me of what you said earlier about the holidays and sort of living in that reality of, like, if my mother has schizophrenia, if I know that she has this set of symptoms, I can come to expect it and prepare for it, which makes me feel less shock, you know, when it does happen. And what you're saying is also reminding me of, like, that term of ambiguous loss, of, like, grieving this person that is alive that may have a mental health issue, and grieving that loss of, like, maybe the parent you wanted them to be in real time because they just can't fulfill that role.
Yeah.
Right. How does one navigate in uncomfortable spaces where there's tension with family members, for example, funerals?
I think preparation, as you spoke about, preparing for the event, you know, going for the event and deciding how long you want to linger. You know, with funerals, sometimes there's a repast or, you know, a burial or all these sorts of things, and you can decide what your time limit can be, how much you can take. Maybe you go and view the body and you don't go to the funeral. So I think thinking about how you want to show up in that space. Now, of course, during a funeral, you can decide to sit by yourself, and you can, you know, maybe leave a few minutes early so you don't have to engage, but really figuring out how you want to be a part of these events without getting overwhelmed by the interactions could be really helpful.
Yeah, that preparation is so important. This person is wondering your perspective and any advice for working with clients once they have developed acceptance and adjusted their expectations/boundaries using the options under their control, but they continue to struggle with guilt, self-judgment, and thoughts like, I should be able to tolerate their behavior, or I'm being selfish.
I'm hearing a lack of support from their environment. And the only place that person might be receiving that support is in the therapy space. They may need more people in their life to encourage them. Have they been honest with other people about what their situation is? And if so, if people are healthy, they will validate that experience for them. So I'm hearing a need for more support outside of the treatment space. When you're in a family and everyone is committed to the dysfunction, right? And you're the person's like, oh no, this thing is not what it should be. But you go back to the family and you're like, look guys, look at all these things. It's like, they're all in it. Yeah. So it's very hard for them to see it. You know, sometimes we don't see stuff until we're like further back from it. That's why we think about our childhood so much as adults, because we're like out of it. Mm-hmm. And so you can like look at it and be like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even know this thing, or, you know, have information about what was healthy or what wasn't healthy. Hindsight is like, wow. And that happens in our families. And sometimes when people, they're in that situation, that is their norm. People don't even know that chaos is unhealthy sometimes because it's the norm. You know, I've heard people say, everyone in my family yells, and that's why I yell. It's like, but you're in a quiet space. Mm-hmm. And so once you're away from that and you realize, wow, everybody's family is not yelling, you now have the ability to think about, do I want to yell all the time? But you may not know that if you're around all this dysfunctional stuff, because everyone there thinks that it's normal. I've been watching, I started watching this show, Vince Staples, and it's on Netflix. And one of the things he talks about is how violence in his neighborhood was so normal. Like he would talk to people and everybody knows somebody who was shot or this thing or that thing. And it took for him getting out of that environment. And something happened, he was doing some interview and he was telling his manager about it, and his manager was so compassionate, like, oh my God, you know, just having this reaction. And he's like, why is he reacting like this? Because in his environment, that's very normal. Mm-hmm. He was like, this was the norm for me. And it took me like looking at this guy's face to be like, wow, he's really having a reaction to this thing that I talk about with my friends and I talk about with my family. So sometimes us getting away from it is when we're able to see, wow, that was not okay. And if we're talking about it with all these people who are experiencing and they're still in it, they may not understand the severity. Mm-hmm. So our expectation of them should really change. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't even expect them to see things our way because they are in it.
That's such a good reminder.